Hello there, and thanks so much for joining me for another tutorial. I'm Erin Eno, and today we're going to be painting these simple, loose watercolor flowers using the glazing method. If you like this tutorial, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and drop me a comment in the comment section. It really helps out my channel. If you want to see more beginner-friendly tutorials like this one, please be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Now grab your paints and let's get started. So today I'm using my Artisto watercolor pad. It's a cellulose paper, but it is 140 pound. I will be using my VIVIVA watercolor pans today just to change things up a bit. And for brushes, I have two Princeton Neptunes, one in a size 8 round and one in a size 4 round. Oh, and I also have my paper towel and a jar of water, of course. So we're going to be using the glazing method today, and basically all glazing means is basically layering. So you're just going to start with a base layer for your flowers, and then glazing is just going over top with other layers once it's dried. Okay, so you're not doing wet in wet, you're just doing a layer over top of a dry layer. So because I'm using my VIVIVA watercolor pans, they are not standard colors, so I'm not going to rhyme off the colors, but you can just basically pick two kind of colors that go together. I'm going to be using orange and red. You can just pick any two colors. You can pick yellow and red, purple and pink, blue and purple. Just as long as your second, or we're actually going to be doing 3 layers of glazing, so just as long as your third layer or your second color that you pick is darker than your first. So I'm going to do orange and red. And this orange is really bright, so I'm just going to dull that down a bit with a bit of this Indian red, they call it. It's just like a little bit of a brownish color. So I don't want it kind of a fluorescent orange. Okay, so that's my base color, but we're going to start with a really light wash of it. There's a little hair in there. So I'm actually going to make a little bit of a wash over here, just so I'm not constantly dipping in and cleaning off my brush. And then what you're going to do is I'm just going to dip my brush in my water and run it along the edge of my jar once just to get some of that pigment off. And we're just going to start with really kind of fluffy, loose petals. Just like so. And we're just going to do like a head-on view of a flower. That might be a little dark. I'm just going to tap some of that up so it's not quite so vivid. Okay, and maybe we'll do a little side view over here. So we'll do the petals in the back here, like so, and then petals from the side. And I am leaving white space in the middle. Okay, just like that, and you're just doing it really loose. And then maybe here we'll do one that's kind of facing down. Okay, so you've got the petals at the back, or at the front rather, and a few petals down at the back. Just like that. And then while that's drying, I'm going to switch to my smaller brush, and we're going to mix up a stem color. So I'm going to use olive green, and I'm also going to wash that down. Not wash it down, water it down to a wash. Okay, now these Princeton Neptune brushes hold quite a bit of water, so I'm just going to tap some off on my paper towel so it's not sopping wet. And we're just going to start, maybe not that light, with the stem. that goes all the way up to this guy. Actually, that's a little bright. I'm going to add some of that brown in there as well. And we'll come off to this flower over here. And to that flower. Then we'll add some leaves. Maybe we'll do a stem of just leaves coming up here. One up here maybe. Do a little branch of, or a little stem of leaves coming off this side. Like so. I'm not doing a major composition here. I just want to show you the effect of the glazing. So I'm not focusing so much on composition, like I say. Maybe another leaf up this way. Maybe one just kind of popping out of here. And I think that's enough. We're not going to go crazy. So we've got our base, and I'm going to switch back to my larger brush. And this is still damp, but it's dry enough that we can go in and put a second layer on. So we're going to go in and do a second layer of this same wash. Okay, maybe a little more pigmented, but not crazy dark. And we're just going to do the same thing. Just some loose petals over top of the existing ones. And they're still going to be kind of light and fluffy. Okay, you don't have to think about it too much. And you're not really kind of making a point of going over your other petals. You can go beyond them, because then you end up getting this nice kind of layered effect that gives the illusion of like multiple petals. Okay, just like that. And we'll go in and do the same thing with the leaves to give them some shape. And I think I'm going to add in just a little bit of a dark blue. Whoa, not that much. That was a little much. I don't want the color to change too drastically. Okay, so I'm just going to tap off some of that excess water again, and we're just going to go on top of the stems and leaves that we've already done. I'm not going on top of the entire stem. I'm just kind of going to one side of it. And this is how you get that kind of glazed, layered effect. And we'll do the same thing on the leaves. And I'm not going over the entire leaf. I'm just kind of going to one side, maybe a little vein up the middle, like so. So it's really kind of loose and just adding a little interest to the leaves that you already have. You can even go outside of your existing leaves, like just to kind of give it some movement. This one might be a little darker because it's sitting under the flower, like so. And if you want a bit of a softer look between the two colors, you can always just rinse off your brush, tap it off on your paper towel. And just kind of soften that edge a bit. Like so. Now I'm using a cellulose paper, and it tends to lift a little easier than a cotton paper. So you want to keep a light touch, or else you'll just be lifting the pigment underneath, and you don't want to disturb it too much. So now that we've got those layers done, I want to make sure these are nice and dry. So I'm just going to dry these a bit with my heat tool. Okay, so now that these are reasonably dry, I want to add my second color, which is going to be red. So I'm just going to add red to this existing orange. And I'm going to stay with my smaller brush because I don't want to go in with too much water and too much pigment at this point. And I'm just going to, let me just zoom in a bit for you here. Okay, so I've got a fair amount of pigment on my brush, and I'm just going to tap some near the center, like so, just on a few petals to start. I'm going to rinse my brush off, and I'm just going to drag it across the lip of my jar, tap it off my paper towel a bit, and then we're going to start drawing this pigment out. Okay, so I'm just rinsing my brush off and pulling this pigment out, not in any particular petal shape, because these layers are just going to kind of create these loose red dimensional kind of petals over top of the existing ones. Okay, so grab a little more pigment. You can even kind of run some up the edges of where it's now wet. Rinse and tap off the excess water and just pull this pigment up. Again, you're not really making specific petal shapes, you're just kind of getting these layers of texture. And you can tap in a little more. Bring some of it right out to the edges. And we'll do this guy back here. Okay, so you're just tapping in that pigment to start, rinsing off your brush, tapping off the excess water, and pulling this pigment out. And you can see I'm not, as I say, I'm not going over the existing petals exactly. I'm just kind of going wherever you want to. Tap in some extra pigment. Like so. And now that this is kind of sat a little bit, you can even put in some more pigment, depending on how dark and vibrant you want your flowers to be. Rinse and dry off my brush. Just kind of let this mingle out a bit. You could even tap in some pigment, dry off a brush, and just flick out some pigment with a dry brush, just like so. Go back to this guy, just put some pigment at the bottom, the base of these petals. Rinse and dry off your brush, and just kind of be really loose and pull that pigment around. So I'm just going to go in and get some heavier pigment, tap it in at the bottom, maybe some more up here. Rinse and dry off your brush, and just loosely kind of play around with it. Just see what kind of comes of it. You don't really have to think about it too much. We'll do this guy down here. Rinse and dry off your brush. You see how I'm just kind of loosely going even beyond the other petals? It just creates a lot of interest and texture. We'll do these back petals. There's no real rhyme or reason as to, you know, where I'm putting the pigment. Just kind of let it do whatever it likes. Just move it around. Be really loose with it. Just going to mix up a little bit more. And you can even just go back for another hit. Of some deeper values here. And I'm going to let them dry a little bit. I'm just going to tap all the flowers. Like so. And you just get these really kind of interesting variations in color. Okay, so I'm going to rinse and dry off my brush again and just drag it out a little bit so you kind of maintain these darker values towards the centers and the edges of the flowers. But you can see how just going in with these layers, you just got a lot of interest in your petals. I'm not smoothing them out too much. I just want them to kind of, you know, have some really defined edges, some kind of softer. And because you go in, every time you go in and hit this wet paint, you're picking up pigment on your brush. So you want to make sure that you are continually going in and kind of cleaning your brush off on your paper towel. Now at this stage I do want some hard edges, so I'm not playing around with it too much. I think I want just a little bit of a darker hit of red up the edge of some of these petals. Maybe a little bit up here. So while they dry, I want to go back and just do another little layer on some of the leaves. So I'm going to get my olive green again, just bring in a little bit of that blue. So it's a fair bit darker. And I'm just going to come up the edge of this stem again. Okay, I'm not going over the entire stem, because then you kind of lose that layered kind of look. I want it to have some character. Let's do a little line on this guy. And I'm not going over the whole leaf. As you can see, I'm just doing like an edge, maybe a little vein. And again, my brush isn't very wet because I don't want a real kind of soft bleeding look to this. The idea is to, you know, keep the edges of these glazed layers. That's what kind of gives it the character. So you're not doing soft blends. But as I did the first time, you can go in and soften up some of the edges if you don't want everything so abrupt. But I'm not going to play around with it too much. So now we're going to go in and do some centers or stamens, and I'm going to take this dark blue and I'm going to add in a bit of that orange so it's more of a browny blue, almost like a gray blue. And I'm going to use this small brush, not a lot of water on my brush because I want to kind of flick these stamens out. Okay, so I'm just going to lightly flick some stamens. Now this one, because it's a side view, we're just going to do longer stamens on this edge and some kind of short ones here. Same with this guy. Actually, we're just going to do them on the one side here. Whoop. Like so. Then we can go in and just kind of do some random dots. Like so. And then for the very centers, I'm just going to take this kind of reddish brown color, add it to that dark color we just did for the stamens. Maybe I'll even bring in a little bit of yellow just to lighten it up a titch. So I've got this kind of nice goldy green yellow, and I'm just going to tap it. Well, take some of the water off my brush. Just going to tap it in the middle. I'm not filling every area because I want to go in with a little bit of a darker color too. I just wanted these light highlights as well. So I'm going to go back in with this really dark color and just tap in a little bit just to get some contrast in the centers. Don't be too heavy-handed with this because you do want that kind of goldy green color to go through, to pop through, because it just gives you a little bit of texture and highlight towards the center. If you go too hard. If you go too dark, it's just going to get all flat. And I think what I want to do is go in with this really dark color again. And just add a little bit more to some of these stems, just in some areas, just so they kind of pop a little more. Maybe a little bit down that center. So you can see how just doing multiple layers and just going darker and darker kind of gives that illusion of softness and gradation to the color, even though they do have harsh edges. I think we can even afford to go back in with this red. And I don't want this too wet because we've got our stamens in there, but I just feel like it could just have a little bit more depth in some of these red areas. So I'm just going to put in a few lines on some of these petals. Not all of them, just a few, just to get a little bit more richness into some of these petals. Just so they're a little bit more dramatic. Okay, so I'm going to rinse off my brush, tap off the excess water, and just hit some of these edges with this last layer. So the idea here is that you're just kind of building till you get the look that you want. I just felt there wasn't quite enough contrast between the oranges and this deep red, so we're just going to put a few more layers in. Okay, so you're starting off light and just putting these hits of deeper values in. And that's what gives you this nice kind of dramatic layered look. So you just start off slow and do multiple layers so you're not running the risk of making everything really flat. And then what I think I will do is just go back in with a little bit more, that's not the right color, of this darker value with that blue, and I'll add some orange to make it kind of brown, but it's very dark. And I'm just going to hit a little bit more in the center just to get a little more contrast. And that's it. That's all there is to doing quick, loose, layered watercolor flowers. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial and that you found it helpful, and give this a go with all different color options. The possibilities are endless, but it is a nice technique if you just want to change from doing like, you know, soft bleeds and stuff. Just another watercolor technique to have a go at. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining me and supporting my channel as always. Take care, and I'll see you next time.